Hey, welcome to the channel. So last season we ended up getting a new bike rack from VelociRAX. And shortly after getting that, I released a short-term review of that rack after doing just a few small road trips around the area. I talked about what I liked, what I didn't like, and hopefully that helped some of you who maybe were on the fence about getting this rack make a decision. So now fast forward, and it's a year later. We've been using the bike rack for a season and a half, and we've done some pretty long road trips with it. So I thought it was a good idea now to check back in and give maybe a long-term review on how this rack's been working for us. So again, if you're on the fence about buying this rack, hopefully what I talk about here today can help you make a decision on whether it's right for you or not. So for my short-term review, pretty much all of the pros about this bike rack transfer over into the long-term review. And one of the main reasons I got this rack was because of the way it loads the bikes. It makes it really easy to get them on and get them off with the way that the rack holds the bikes vertically, and the way that it has a mechanism to actually put it into a loading position where the rack swings down a little bit, making it really easy just to get the bikes up there and get them off. So I really like that. The other thing I like about it is that it only comes in contact with the tires of the bike. There's nothing on the rack that you need to connect to your frame or any other part of the bike or the handlebars. It's just on the wheels, so you don't have to worry about anything rubbing off your paint or putting extra friction onto your frame or any other part of your bike. So I really do like that. And this with the racks that I was looking at from Kuat and Thule as well, where they're the platform style, those are really good too because they only come in contact with your wheels as well, with the tires. But what I didn't like about the Kuat and the Thule ones is once you get onto, you add on the 4-bike extension, the bikes are actually sitting back, coming out from the back of your vehicle pretty far. And like all that weight is just getting pulled farther and farther from the vehicle, and I didn't really like that. So with the VelociRAX, the way this stands vertically, it keeps that weight closer to the back of your vehicle, and I do like that. So we ended up going with the 7-bike rack, and even though we're typically only traveling with 4 bikes at a time, my wife, my bike, my 2 kids, we went with the 7 one just because my kids are at an age now where they have friends who also bike. So if we're ever going to go on a trip and want to take a friend or two, we have room to put their bikes on our rack and take them out there, right? The other reason was I liked the idea of if we're traveling with 4 bikes, that I can leave space between each of the bikes on the rack. So basically when I load the bikes, I put it in spot 1, 3, 5, and 7, and then we got extra space between each of the bikes where I just eliminate any chance of a pedal coming in contact with the frame or anything like that. So that's the reason we went with the 7. So I think we could have also went with the 5X that VelociRAX makes, and my understanding is that it's the same width as the 7 bike rack, but it just has 5 hoops for your bike, so you got that extra space between each of them. So that's always an option as well if you don't want the 7, and that's going to be extra weight with those extra hoops. So something else I really like about this bike rack is that it comes included with a wall mount. So you basically mount this thing on the wall in your garage, and when you pull your bike rack off your vehicle, you can actually hang it on this mount in your garage, and then you have a functional bike rack in your garage. So with us, we have so many bikes, they can get pretty unruly in the garage. They're just kind of laying around or trying to stand them up against the wall, and when you already have all the other stuff that you have in your garage, it gets a little bit difficult to manage. So with this, you just mount this thing on your wall, and you now have, in our case, we have a place to put 7 of our bikes and just hang them on the wall in the corner, and it keeps them nicely out of the way. So that's been pretty slick, and I'm really enjoying that. So like I said, we have done now some longer road trips with this rack. So we live in Saskatoon, and we've driven out to the Rocky Mountains, a few times now with the rack. And, I think probably our longest trip was probably around 2,500 kilometers. And that was driving from Saskatoon to Jasper, where we then drove out to the Valemount Bike Park in Valemount, BC, and then drove back to Jasper, and then drove along to Banff, past Banff up to Panorama, where we were at the bike park in Panorama. And once we wrapped up there, we drove back through Calgary and then back to Saskatoon. So like I said, about 2,500 kilometers with this thing. And it's, as it looks like a really sturdy and beefy bike rack, and in person, it is. And no issues driving with that thing on the highway for that amount of time through rain. We were in some muddy conditions at one point, and at Valemount Bike Park, we were shuttling up and down at one point, and the shuttle road was really, really loose, really sandy, and it was really making a mess of everything. But the bike rack, it did hold up, and it was a real pleasure to work with. So on those long road trips, no issues at all, and nothing came loose. So if you've watched the videos on the VelociRAX site, and they show you how to mount this thing, it has a nice what do they call it, a rattle system, anti-rattle system, where you put it into your hitch, and then there's a bolt that you just basically tighten up, which basically expands the insert out so it gets nice and tight in the hitch, and you get no rattle. So that works really well. It uses a 17 millimeter wrench, so you always got to have one of those handy if you're if you're taking this thing on and off. But the anti-rattle system works really well. And I know that like the Thule one, it has a similar anti-rattle system, but I think it's just like a thing you adjust with your hand. So I don't know how tight you can actually get that just with your hand, but when you're using a wrench, you can really torque on that thing and get it nice and tight. So no issues with the bike rack coming loose over that long road trip. It just stayed nice and tight, and it was really no problems throughout the whole trip. So something else to consider is the price of this thing. So I think ours cost around $1,100 for the 7 bike rack. And that sounds like expensive, and it is, but when you're getting into this kind of class of bike rack, that's expected, I think. So when you're looking at the Thule or the Kua ones, which I was, if you're just getting the two bike mount, then I think they're around $700 or $800, I think $800 Canadian. But then once you add on that the 4 bike extender, that adds another $600. So you're up around like $1,400. So it is actually ends up being cheaper to go with the VelociRAX rack. And, that wasn't a huge consideration for me. It wasn't a big enough difference that it was, going to break the deal or anything like that. But it is something to consider if, you are trying to work it into your budget, and, that $300 or $400 could make a big difference for some people. So that's something else to consider. And something else with this rack is, which I didn't really consider when I bought it, is when you pull up with this thing, it does get noticed. And I found that a lot of people come over to you to chat about it and ask, hey, what's up with this bike rack? And, can you tell me about it and all that? So, I guess this could be a pro or a con for people. If you like talking to people and meeting new people, then this is something that you might like. But if you are an introvert like me, maybe that's not the greatest thing for you, where you have people coming over and always wanted to talk about your bike rack. So, let's get into some of the stuff maybe that I don't like about it. There's not a lot, but it's worth bringing up some of the stuff here because it might be a big deal for some of you. So first off, this thing is big and it is heavy, meaning that I can't load it and unload it by myself in terms of getting it onto the truck. I probably could. It is, I think it weighs around 100 pounds, so I could probably do it. But the issue with it is that it's really awkward. It's not just something you can pick up and put into the hitch. It's like, the shape of it makes it really hard to get a good grip on it just by yourself. So that's not the greatest. My wife and I always have to make sure we're available to get this thing loaded and unloaded. And especially when we're getting ready to go on a trip, my wife's getting other stuff ready. So then I always have to call her over and have her stop whatever she's doing so we can get this rack mounted. So what ended up happening was last season is because it was such a hassle to take on and off, we just left it on my truck pretty much the whole summer. And it's not a big deal, but it's also not the greatest to leave that thing on your truck. It's big. And having that thing parked in a parking lot, people walking through a parking lot might not notice or just not paying attention, and they smoke their head on it or something like that. So that, as far as I know, that's never happened, but that is a possibility. And the other thing too is just driving around with an empty rack on my truck, especially something of that size. It is annoying because it messes with my reversing sensors, so those no longer are useful because they just go nuts because they're sensing the rack there, right? And also the reverse camera, that's going to be, it's not unusable, but I mean, when you see out the back of your camera, you're basically just seeing a rack in the way. So, you lose some of the functionality of your vehicle if you have that stuff. So, and then recently this year, what ended up happening was the local police have started to give tickets out to people who have hitch mounted racks on their vehicle. And what they're claiming is that if they are obstructing your license plate, then they're going to give you a ticket. And so I know a guy personally who got one, and he was driving around. He didn't have any bikes on his rack, and he got pulled over by the police, and they gave him a ticket because his license plate was obstructed. And the policeman did say that, maybe if you had bikes on it, then, he would have been a little bit more lenient and just let it go. So, that's not the greatest. So because that happened, my wife and I decided to just take the rack off when not in use and put it into the garage. And so again, that makes it annoying because now, if we're biking, 1 or 2 times a week, then that's pulling this thing off and on 1 or 2 times a week, which can be annoying just because it is a hassle to get this thing loaded and unloaded. But on the plus side, that meant that we were actually using it in our garage on the wall mount, so we could actually get our bikes out of the way in the garage. Because last season we were not using it as a wall mount, as a wall rack, because we just left it on the truck, so we lost that capability of it. So, I guess a positive did come out of this police thing happening. And I did look at maybe possibly, if I wanted to leave the rack on the truck all summer, I looked at ways maybe of mounting the license plate onto the rack, but there's no real good place to do it. Like once you get the bikes on there, I don't think there's anywhere I can put a license plate where it's not obstructed by the bikes. So, that's something else to consider. And I think the Thule rack, it actually, they have an actual license plate mount available for it that you can, get around this problem. So like I said, in the pros, loading the bikes onto this rack and pulling them off is nice and easy because of the piston it has, where it lowers it into a nice loading position. But one thing to keep in mind is that when you load a bunch of bikes onto this, even like 4, it gets pretty heavy to push back up. I'm able to do it by myself, but I'm not sure if my wife, went out with some of her friends for a bike ride and they took the rack, I'm not sure that my wife could push it up by herself. I mean, if you're with someone else, then the 2 of you can do it nice and easy, but it is something to consider. Like if you're maybe not very strong, you might have problems pushing this bike rack back up into its driving position. So this might depend on your kids, but I've seen videos where kids are able to load their bikes onto this thing and get them off as well. But with my kids, they're 11 and 8. They're not the biggest kids. They're probably a little bit short for their age, but they haven't been able to load their bikes onto this rack by themselves. They're able to unload them and pull them off. That's been fine, but getting them up onto the rack has not worked for them. And I think this might just have to do with your vehicle. So like I said, I drive a truck, so it is higher than other vehicles. So I think that's probably playing a part here in them trying to get their bikes loaded. So if you're using an SUV or some other smaller vehicle where it's going to be a little bit lower down, then I think you might have a better chance having your kids get these things loaded, the bikes loaded by themselves. But for me, it hasn't been a big deal because it's so easy to load anyway that it takes me an extra 2 seconds to grab their bike from them and throw it up for them. So it's not a huge deal. And the other thing too is I noticed it hasn't been a big deal for us because we do have the 7 bike rack, and like I said, we load them in every other slot. But if you are loading them all right next to each other, I do notice that you got to really be careful with the pedals because the pedals can come in contact with the frame next to it. So, and if you're bouncing around on the road, you're going to get that pedal knocking into the frame. So it's very easy to just do a quick check and move your pedals into the right position, and it's not an issue, but it is something to keep in mind. So like I said, I really like the option to have this thing mounted on your wall when you're not using it. And it's been really great. But what we found between my wife and I is getting it into the right position and getting it loaded onto the wall. I don't know if it's just us, but we're super awkward when we do it, and we can't find a good way to just smoothly pull it off the truck and then move it onto the wall. We're always struggling and trying to get our hands in the right place. And you gotta when you pull it off, you release the piston and you gotta swing the part that goes into the hitch into a certain position so you can get it onto the wall. And I'm always like finding it really awkward to be holding the rack and moving this thing into the right position. So I think it just comes, we've been getting better at it this year as we've been doing it more. So it's less awkward now. But when I watch the video on the VelociRAX website, man, they do it so easily. I don't know why we just can't do it like they do, but we often struggle with it. Another thing to keep in mind is, with these bikes being loaded vertically, it is, they are sitting pretty high. So if you're, when we went out to Canmore for a bike trip last year, we were parking in an underground parkade at the place we were staying at. And with my truck, we basically were as high as we could be without being able to enter the parkade with our bikes. I think we had maybe like literally 2 millimeters of clearance going under there. So if you're in a vehicle that's maybe a little bit higher up, like, I mean, I drive a truck, but it's not lifted or anything, it's just stock. But if you have a truck and it's, lifted slightly, you might have issues getting into places like this. So, I mean, in reality, what you could do is just take your bikes off, lower your rack down into the loading position so you can drive into the space, but you're still gonna have to be aware that, you might be too high to get into some of these areas. And, that's not gonna be a problem if you're using a platform style like the Thule or the Kuat, where, it's not going any higher than, your tailgate or something like that. So something else I did not like about this thing was that with it mounted and in the loading position, the tailgate of my truck could not open fully. So I always had to it opened really close. It got to maybe 90%, but you had to stop it at that point and then hold it and get whatever you needed to get out of the back of your truck. So that was annoying. It wasn't a big deal, but it just was more of an annoyance than anything. But then, last year, VelociRAX did release a hitch extender, which also actually drops it down about, I think, must be 4 inches or so. So now it allows you to open your tailgate fully on a full-size truck. So I ended up getting that, and it works really slick, and it's that annoyance is gone, and it's really nice just to be able to not worry about letting your tailgate crash down onto the rack. So you can just use your tailgate as normal. So that's been really great. Something to keep in mind with that, though, is that it will reduce the departure angle on your vehicle because it is dropping that hitch down a few inches. So keep that in mind, if you are doing any type of off-road terrain while you're maybe driving to some out-of-the-way bike trails. So you're going to lose a little bit of departure angle there, but probably for most people, this isn't going to be a big deal. Another thing that I've noticed is that the hitch connector that slides into your receiver, it's starting to rust quite a bit. I don't know if that's a big deal or not, but it's something I noticed, and it probably is because I was leaving it on the truck all the time last winter, and through the rain, it was always out there. So maybe that contributed to it rusting, but now that I'm pulling it off, after every use, maybe this isn't going to be a problem going forward, but another thing for you to consider. So I did mention that we went to the Valemount Bike Park last season, and we shuttled for about the last half of the day, and the shuttle road was really dry. It was really loose and sandy, and it really made a mess of everything, like I mentioned. But what I found is that as the kind of around the hinge area where the piston is, that started to really get a lot of different sand and mud caked in there. And when we were trying to put the bike rack down into the loading position and then back up into the driving position, it actually got pretty difficult to do. And it was actually not seizing up, but it was actually getting pretty difficult to put up and down into that position. So that could be a problem, I guess, if it's getting really dirty. And that was the only time I ever noticed that. And it wasn't a huge deal. It was still usable, but it definitely was something that I noticed. And then after we left there, we went to a car wash, and I hosed it off, and everything was working fine after that, and I haven't had any issues since. So something that the Kuat and the Thule racks offer is they come with a built-in locking mechanism. So basically they come with some cable locks that you pull out from within the hitch, from within the rack, and you can wrap that around your bikes and lock it up. So the VelociRAX didn't offer anything like that, but recently, the same time I think they released the Hitch Extender and dropper, they did release a add-on that you could put onto your rack, and it is a cable locking mechanism that you can then use the same way that you would on any of those other racks. So I ended up buying one of those as well when I got the Hitch Extender, and I just haven't installed it yet. So this thing, you know, like the ones in the other racks, it's just a cable. It's not super thick. So I think it's really only good for using, like, you know, if you're driving somewhere and you gotta like stop in the grocery store to grab some milk or something, just kind of like really quick, I think it's okay to use for that. But this isn't something that I want to lock up, you know, and be really secure where it's a long-term time, maybe overnight or something. If you're camping or, you know, at a hotel or something like that in underground parking, I don't think I would trust this cable lock system that they have, but it is nice to have in a pinch. So so that's cool that they added that. But, you know, like, you know, I was talking about the difference in price between those platform racks and this one. But once you add on that Hitch Extender and the cable locking system, you're basically up at what those other two bike racks cost. So, you know, once you add those options in, it's you're basically on par with those other guys. So, I mean, that's about it for the long-term review. It's not really much different than the short-term review. Like I said, the pros are pretty much the same. You know, a few different cons emerged after using it over a year, but nothing that has made me, you know, regret the purchase. I still really love this bike rack, and you know, the cons that they did have in terms of, you know, not being able to open the tailgate, that is now remedied for me. So that's really cool, and you know, it's held up over the long road trips, no issues, and it's, you know, it's been going strong ever since I got it. So, you know, if you're on the fence about buying this thing, hopefully, you know, what I talked about here can help you make a decision. And if you do have any questions, definitely reach out to me, add a comment in the video, and I will definitely reply to you and hopefully help you out a little bit more if you need it. So hopefully this video was helpful to you. And again, thanks for coming and checking it out. Really appreciate that. And until next time, stay safe and take it easy.